Hi everyone, and welcome to this video in the series on approaching unseen text. Today's focuses on one of the most common text types to come up, and that is newspaper articles. Now, throughout my video, I'll be referencing a number of terms and concepts that are mentioned in my previous videos. So if any of them are new to you, it might be useful to go back and watch those videos as well. So let's remind ourselves of a few key things to consider if you are ever given a newspaper article to write about. So number one, an article is printed as part of a publication, usually focused on a subject that is of current interest to the public. I think this last bit in particular is key, but obviously if you are sitting an exam, you're not likely to be given an article that is completely up to date. So it's important to consider the context in which the article was written, how old the article is. In the past, for example, I've seen exam boards give students articles from the 40s, and if you're studying the language change over time unit, you could be given an article that is much older than this. Always consider why the topic you've been given would be in the public interest at that specific time. Number two, this focuses on the purpose of the article, which is usually to be informative in some way, but depending on the type of article you might be given, it could also be to entertain or argue a certain point of view. Number three, audience varies widely depending on the publication. This is a very important one and something some students don't consider in the detail that they should. If you're given a local newspaper, for example, something like the Hull Daily Mail, it's going to have a very niche local audience and most likely be about a local issue. If you're given something like the Financial Times, which sometimes seems to feature, then you're going to have a very highbrow, likely wealthy audience who are in a specific business, which of course is going to massively impact on the way the article is written and what it focuses on. Finally, number four, and this links to the previous one, and that is the use of bias, which can form a huge part of newspapers. I always think that it's useful for students to do a bit of research on some of the key newspaper publications in the UK, just to have a bit of an idea of their views politically, who they're owned by, and also who they class as their target audience. It can sometimes be quite surprising when you look this information up. Now, you can't possibly research every newspaper that's ever existed, but if you were to be given an article from a very well-known newspaper and you already know a little bit about it, you can already then be quite confident on who the audience is going to be before you even read it. So I've picked an article to look at today, which comes from the Times online newspaper. And let's imagine we've done our research into some of the bigger newspapers, the Times being one of them, and we have a rough idea of the readership and their values. We would know that the Times is a daily national newspaper, so we will have quite a big reach across the UK and internationally. They claim themselves to be centre-right politically, which means they're more likely to have conservative values, something that is definitely important to consider with the article we're looking at here. Their readers are predominantly ABC1, meaning they have professional careers and are likely to be in the higher earners of the country, and both their website and their newspaper are paid for. So that means that if you are accessing this article, you've done so intentionally, which is very important, as you're unlikely to pay for a newspaper or article subscription for something that you don't value the opinions of. So I think that bit in particular is very important. So let's read the opening of this article, and as we do, I will point out things that you might want to consider if you are ever given an unseen article as a text to look at. So the first thing we're told here is that this is part of the comment section of the newspaper, which means we're anticipating this to have a strong opinion on its topic, perhaps arguing against what others think. It's interesting that the headline includes the words "the Times' view," as sometimes you might argue that if you're given a comment piece, it's just one individual's opinions, but this almost makes it seem like the newspaper is owning this as their own opinion as well. So the Times' view on royal interventions, princely politics. Now, a very low-grade student might probably try and make something of the alliteration here, princely politics. I really would try and avoid comments like that though, because what would you really say about it? Much better to read the article, really get a grip on the opinion and the voice being conveyed, and then link this to your techniques and terminology. Then we have our tagline: the monarchy's resilience rests on its having adapted to a purely ceremonial role. The Queen's heirs should scrupulously avoid political controversy. So we have a quite strong declarative statement here. Interesting use of the modal verb should though. It shows strength but also still conveys that this is an opinion rather than a fact. So that might be something I choose to comment on. This tagline also essentially tells us exactly what the article will be about, which is why it's so important to read it properly. We now know that this person is going to be arguing that the royal family must not get involved in politics if they wish to survive in their ceremonial role, as the author puts it. They then go on to say, the Queen, whose Platinum Jubilee the nation and Commonwealth celebrated this month, became yesterday the second longest serving monarch of a sovereign country in history. Only King Louis of France, who reigned from 1643 to 1715, has exceeded her longevity. She has managed to retain popularity through immense social changes, in part because she has stood above partisan politics. It is an example that her heirs should strive to emulate, but they risk falling short owing to recent interventions in policy debate. This opening is going to a bit of a history before then coming back to the author's opinion here. Notice as well the frequent use of low-frequency lexis such as partisan politics, emulate, we had scrupulously up here as well, which all links in with that higher educated audience that we know that this newspaper has, which of course has a big impact on the voice that is created in the text. Right, so reading the next section. The Times reported on Saturday Prince Charles's criticism of the government's plans to send to Rwanda migrants who arrive in Britain illegally. He said he thinks the government's whole approach is appalling. It was clear he was not impressed with the government's direction of travel, our source said. The Prince expressed particular discomfort about the potential for the plans to overshadow the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting this month in Kigali, the Rwandan capital, where he will represent the Queen. So we start here with a clear discourse marker, and they use this discourse marker to refer back to a previous article they have written. I'd maybe pick up on the almost ironic feeling here that they can only write this article criticising what Charles has said because they, the Times, reported what he had allegedly said in a previous article. So I guess if they hadn't written that first article, they wouldn't be able to write this one. Maybe not a huge point to make, but it could definitely be worth mentioning. Then we have this mention of the source, very vague, as is quite common in newspaper articles. Interesting, the use of the collective pronoun our source, almost as if it's someone who speaks to the newspaper about the royal family quite regularly. And we have this reported speech which creates this sort of second voice coming through the article as well. I might also pick up on the hedging here. He said he thinks the government's whole approach is appalling. Quite interesting. He could have just said the government's approach is appalling without the I think, which maybe shows that he's not being as strong in his views as he could have been, or maybe that the source is softening what he was saying. So, reading the next two paragraphs, the royal family and their close advisers must be wary about a creeping politicalisation of the monarchy. Prince William crossed that boundary in his address at the party at the palace this month, using the Jubilee celebrations to express views on climate change. Praising the work of visionary environmentalists, the Duke of Cambridge said, "The pressing need to protect and restore our planet has never been more urgent." It does not matter that the cause of environmental concern is widely espoused by policymakers and opinion formers. The proper place for these sentiments is in public debate, not on great civic occasions. There is reason for this. So, in this sentence here, we have the stronger modal verb than we did previously. We've now got the use of the word must, which maybe shows that at the start, perhaps the writer now has had his chance to make his point. He feels like he's justified in using this stronger modal verb. It also, I think, gives that sense of urgency to what he's saying. Then we have this quite interesting verb choice in creeping politicalisation, as if it's happening slowly and most won't notice it, with this article maybe being the thing that draws our attention to it, perhaps before it's too late. Then he speaks about what Prince William has said on climate change, something which many probably wouldn't see as a political topic, which the writer has then accounted for here when he says that it is widely espoused, which means supported. Another bit of low frequency lexis there as well, and it's espoused by policymakers and opinion formers. We then end on another quite formal declarative statement. There is proper place for these sentiments. It's in public debate, not on great civic occasions. one which I believe shows how this author feels about the monarchy. Some students may very quickly read this article, see its negative, and then come to the conclusion that the writer is anti-monarchy, but that wouldn't be true at all. He talks about great civic occasions such as the Jubilee, showing that the writer is actually pro-monarchy, but wants them to stick to their place and believes that that place is outside of politics. If we think back to what we know about the Times newspaper, would we expect them to be pro-monarchy? Yes, we would, because their political views are largely conservative, which means they want to conserve the order of things as they are. Again, showing how important it is to do a bit of research into newspapers. So looking at the last bit of the article, I've cut this article down from the original, as is often the case in unseen text you're given, but let's read these final 2 paragraphs. Very few policy initiatives come without trade-offs, and it is the task of elected governments to make difficult judgments about where these should lie. If the world is to move to a more sustainable pattern of consumption, this will involve paying more for renewable sources of energy. There may be an overwhelming case for this, but it would be irresponsible to maintain that there are no costs involved, and households of modest means, rather than princes born to great privilege, will be the ones making the greatest sacrifices. Monarchies in Europe are scarce. Only 7 have survived continuously since 1850, and none have done so outside Scandinavia, the Low Countries, and the United Kingdom. In every case, the royals have adopted a purely ceremonial role. That is much to the good. In attending both solemn and joyous occasions of state, the Queen is given a sense of historical continuity and national cohesion. These precious intangibles will be diluted if her successors become just another type of politician while lacking electoral legitimacy. So there are a few things that I would pick out from these final 2 paragraphs, and hopefully now you might start to see how you could tie different bits of the article together to make points if you were writing about this, rather than just talking about it in a linear fashion. So we start with another declarative statement here, and this one in particular I think shows who the audience is for this article, as it begins to bring in financial matters and how this might impact on how sustainable a country could be. And it also shows the respect the author has for elective governments and their powers. We then again get this sense of more urgency coming through with the line, it would be irresponsible to maintain that there are no costs involved. Again, you can see there's a use of modal verb here, again signifying strength and also the knowledge of the author. We then end this paragraph with this sentence, which starts with the conjunction and, which to me seems quite informal actually for what's come previously. And what I think is particularly interesting here is that you have the repeated use of the pre-modifier great, and it's used to juxtapose 2 things. You've got the great privilege of the prince, and then we've got the superlative, which is talking about the greatest sacrifices that those on modest means will need to make. Also notice that the writer uses the phrase the ones when describing those on modest means, almost as if he doesn't count himself or perhaps even the readership of this article within this category, which again I think shows the audience of this article, and is probably one of the most interesting sentences I think you could talk about in this whole thing. Finally, the article ends with the very short, simple sentence, echoing perhaps that the royal family shouldn't ever believe that their positions in society are safe, before again then showing the support he has for the monarchy, that conservative value. It's good that they are in that ceremonial role. He praises the Queen for giving that sense of historical continuity, and then ends with that adjective precious, a word which I think has connotations of keeping something safe, which is what he believes needs to happen, but it needs to happen in the right way. So finally, I've taken all of my findings and I've written them up into a paragraph. I've decided to focus on the modal verbs, as that's something that we saw throughout the article, which means that I can tie different parts of the article together in my answer. So this is what I've written. The writer's frequent use of modal verbs within the article helps to convey their strong feelings and the sense of urgency they have regarding this topic. They discuss the creeping politicisation the royal family currently have, the use of the verb creeping perhaps making this seem like an issue most readers aren't currently aware of, as it is appearing slowly, and giving the impression the writer, or the Times newspaper, are the ones to draw our attention to it. The reader is told that the royal family must be wary of this, a strong modal verb conveying that sense of determination on bringing this issue to light and giving the writer's voice a sense of authority on the topic. The writer also discusses how the Queen's heirs should scrupulously avoid political controversy, a less urgent but still firm use of modality to present their opinions more as facts, the Queen's heirs also directing the article very pointedly at only a few people. Again, the article ends with the phrase, "These precious intangibles will be diluted if," creating the same impact as previous sentences, using a declarative statement which is an opinion, but presenting it as a fact, leaving little room for the reader to disagree with what is stated here. So hopefully you can see that in this answer I've tied together different parts of the article. I've not necessarily talked about them in order of where they appear in the article either, and that just makes my answer sound a lot more cohesive and means that I'm not just talking about each paragraph one by one. Thank you for watching this video on approaching unseen texts. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe to my channel.